we're here to learn about how audiobooks go from the narrator's home recording studio to a student's ears. So we're going to learn about the post-production of an audiobook and how books make their way to the student. So the question of the day is, what happens to a book after it has been recorded? So narrators, you know what it's like when you're working on a book, listeners, talk volunteers, you all know what happens during the production process, but what's next? Where does the book go after it's been created? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to walk you through a little bit of the post-production process. And then we're going to be joined by Audrey, Michael, and Eleanor to share a little bit more.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Ziegler. I am the digital audio coordinator here at Learning Ally, and I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you all about audio post-production today. So what exactly does that mean? So the nature of our volunteer model is that basically anyone can record from anywhere. So that creates a lot of different environments that we want to try to create a baseline so that it seems as if everyone's recording in a similar location. So when the books are finished being checked and read, they come to me for what we call audio post-processing. And we use a software called Isotope RX, which is an industry standard audio editing and restoration tool. So what does that mean in terms of what we do? It does a lot of things. It can filter out background noise, and it can minimize plosives and sibilance and almost any recording issue that you could imagine. It has a means of tackling it. So over the time that we've utilized this tool, we've created a number of different, what I like to call recipes that tackle the most common audio issues that we hear. So, well, like I said, that's background noise, plosives, things like that. And then we spend a lot of time leveling out the different files so that there's no jumps in volume or anything like that. So with that in mind, I'm gonna show you what that looks like. I have an example so you can hear what we're talking about. And then when we're done with that, I will show you what the final product looks like in our Learning Ally audiobook player. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen out with you. Okay, so I'm first going to play you an example of something that was recorded that nothing was done to, and this is exactly how we received it.
Chapter 5. The Apple Business Grows. In 1800, the census counted 5.3 million people in the United States.
We can tell from hearing that right off the bat, there's a lot of background noise. There's a lot of things we just wouldn't really want in a final recording. So we'll take something like that and basically run it through a specialized batch I like to call recipes, which we have for various common audio issues from what you all would experience from your unique individual recording environments, since everyone is recording from, various places all over the country and globe at this point. So after we receive something like that, I'll basically take a listen to it, diagnose what I think should happen to it, and then it'll come out something like this.
Chapter 5. The Apple Business Grows. In 1800, the census counted 5.3 million people in the United States.
So you can hear the difference there. A lot of that background noise has just been filtered out, and it allows us to just very quickly and easily make what is otherwise an okay recording into something that is so much better and much more user-friendly to someone who is listening, because a lot of those extraneous sounds and hums, and that will really turn off a member who's trying to use this. It's an easy thing to get distracted by. So we really make it a point to do as best as we can to remove these kinds of things and really produce the best possible audiobook that we can. So we now do this for every book that we do, whether it is a classic audio title or voice text. And it has been an extremely beneficial program for us to use. And like I said, very versatile. With that in mind, and our post-production step evolving as it has done, we do want to just remind all active volunteers that we do want untreated raw audio. And the reason for this is because with a program such as iZotope or any other post-production style of software, you can run into issues with the resampling of the audio, or you can end up with, if you were to potentially normalize the audio on your end, we can end up with this over-processed kind of sound that is just not the greatest that it could be. So we do just remind you to make sure that you check out our specs for recording and make sure that you are abiding by those. So thank you all for everything you do and for your time and for joining us today. And I will pass it back off. So that's just a small sample of what the RX software can do, and it can do much more than just filter out background noise. It's a very powerful piece of technology that it's been a wonder to use. So just to reiterate, audio post-production is the second to last step in our production model. So every single title gets listened to, it gets diagnosed for what kind of treatment it needs, and then it gets run through the RX system, at which point all the titles go into build. And I'll just briefly show you what, in case anyone hasn't seen what our final product looks like in the player, I'm going to give you a little example, and I'll let Audrey go into a deeper dive on what QA is, quality assurance, which is our last line of defense in production, so that we can make sure that there's no errors in any of the books before they get to our users and our members. So here's just an example of a children's book written by LeBron James that just got released.
I promise to work hard and do what's right, to be a leader in this game of life. I promise to go to school and read as much as I can, to follow the rules and respect the game plan. I promise to run full court and show up each time, to give.
So just to give you guys a little example, I know we don't have time to play through the entire title, but it's just for anyone who's unfamiliar with what our finished voice text books look like. This is an example. We highlight on a sentence level, which studies have found make children with learning disabilities much more able to follow along with the stories and comprehend the material that much better. So I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end for anybody that wants to take a deeper dive into any of this. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Audrey Santos for some clarification on our quality assurance process. So take it away, Audrey.
Thank you, Russell. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. Just wanted to touch on some really important points that Dave has talked about, that Kevin has talked about. And that is that Labs is just one of our book solutions. We have several audiobook solutions, including the Labs. The textbook and the literature QA is actually part of the Labs process. So it's what happens to books after they get into our library. And so the books that we're reviewing currently on the textbook side are all of the books that have been or are currently in our library. Whereas the books that Kevin, his team is reviewing are newer titles. We will be in the process of reviewing newer titles on the textbook side as well. But right now, what we're trying to do is go through and create that user experience for every volunteer or for every student who is listening to these books. And so it's really important to have that firm understanding of what is the experience like for students. As Dave said, as we get younger and younger students starting to read at younger ages, it's really important to keep them engaged. It's important to keep them involved in the narration as storytelling from the beginning. And so anything that could cause a distraction to that opportunity to hear the book and to listen to the story is what we're wanting to catch. And so in the QA process, the things that you're looking for are things like what Kevin had said, like any audio issue that could be causing a distraction. So anything that's a buzzing, a background noise. Somebody had asked about mouse clicks. Anything that's going to cause an audible distraction to the text itself is what we're looking for. The other thing that we're looking for is any kind of technical issue. The difference between classic audio and voice text is that in voice textbooks in the labs, the words show up on the screen, whereas in classic audio, we're making an assumption that the students have the textbook right in front of them, and so they're only getting the audio. And so if there's any type of issue with page announcements, we want to know about those. If there's any issues with headings, we want to know about those too. Because we don't have the written text on the screen, what happens is we'll have to pay attention to what the headings are in the EasyBooks lab itself. This particular thing that we're looking for also is, what is the quality of the reader? What is the narrator performance? If we have a narrator who's delivering the material in a very monotone fashion, it's going to be harder for the students to be able to stay focused. And so those are the things that you want to pay attention to when you're looking at reviewing one of our classic audio books. I'm going to just share my screen right now because I want to show you what that looks like. So this role is fairly independent. When you go to the QA landing page or landing site in our volunteer portal, there's going to be two places that you can land. You can land on the literature QA or the textbook QA. I'm going to do just a very, very quick review for you of the textbook QA. Because everything that you need to get started is going to be right here, and it's fairly independent for you to be able to navigate through this information. There are going to be steps 1 through 5. The first step is really about downloading the Labs app. The step 2 and step 3 are tutorial videos, which will walk you through the process in more detail. Step 4 is joining the Twist channel, and step 5 is completing your first textbook review. Also, the assignment tab is where you can go to self-assign yourself to a project. The credentials are located right here in our assignment page. And then you can just go through and choose a book, add your name, the date, and then you can begin reviewing. The rest of the materials that you need for doing this particular review are going to be also in that Getting Started page. So up at the top, you'll also see specific guidelines to look for, and then textbook worksheet. I want to take you a little bit more in depth into what it's going to look like in the Labs app. Once you have it downloaded, you're going to be able to update your book. And all of those are done in the app. And I'm not going to take you step by step through this because this is contained within the video. But if you go to this little person icon in the front with the hamburger next to them, this is where you can add books, manage your books, update your books. So all of that happens in this section. Once you've added a book to your to the application, you're going to want to download the book. And so say, for example, you see that a book here, it'll tell you if it's a voice textbook or classic audio book. Within Textbook QA, we're really just focusing on classic audio. And so you would download the book by hitting this down arrow, and then you'll hear a chime. And then once it's ready to listen to that book, you would come here and you would be able to hit play. Once you hit play, The things that you want to listen for are going to be located here. So you're going to look for specific pages and page announcements. So if you go to the pages, you can listen for if a page was announced correctly, and you can just click on that. And it takes you directly to that page. You can also go back to the table of contents, and you want to check for whether or not the chapter headings are correct. So these would be considered technical issues if they're not correct. You can also forward. You can reverse. You can skip forward. You can also skip back. So the things that we're really listening to are, as you're listening, what are those things that really come out, that really stand out and keep you from being able to listen to that book in a way that's going to be a great experience for you. So I don't want to take up too much time because we've asked some volunteers as well to help us today. We have two volunteers in the textbook side of QA. It's Terry Dowd and Janet Capers. And we've asked them to basically answer a few questions for us. The questions are, what are the most common errors that you are finding and noting in the QA experience? What issues do you contemplate making notes of, but are unsure? And how can we use this information to improve our books after experiencing QA? So we're just going to ask Terry and Janet one at a time to unmute themselves. And if you can just go ahead and help answer those questions for us. Okay. So I'm going to go to mute myself. Russell, maybe if you can help gather these folks.
Yeah. So what I'm going to just, Terry, you're going to be allowed to talk. So you can unmute yourself to speak, and let me just get the same set up. Janet. I think I've got you there. Yep. So you should be able to unmute yourselves to chime in.
Hi, this is Terry.
Hello, Terry.
Very good. I guess some of the things that I've been noticing, and I've been a narrator and also a listener in the literature side. So I'm just starting in the textbook side. So this has been very helpful to me. But some of the things that I've noticed, the pace is very important. Some readers, despite whatever the grade level is that the book is intended for, just go very, very slowly. And I think they're trying to be very clear, and the enunciation is very good, but it should be a pleasant thing to listen to and move along and have inflection. And then again, some people seem to race through it, probably thinking that they should get it done as quickly as possible. But the good enunciation is wonderful, but inflection is very important, and it shouldn't be too sterile. Even if you listen to a documentary on television or a video, there's still inflection in the narrator's voice, even though it's a nonfiction type of topic. So that would be one of the things that that I've noticed that varies widely. Another thing is just being careful about shuffling papers. That's what the sound is like. Or, of course, background noise, being too close to the microphone, those types of things. And you can listen to what you just recorded to make sure that those sounds are not there. So that's just a couple of the things that I've noticed. And I do have one question, and that's the correct way to announce ellipsis. I have, there's been all different ways of doing that in the reading that I'm currently doing. So maybe we could just get some information on how that should be narrated.
Thank you, Terry, for sharing. And I'm going to just answer that question. A lot of these books that we're currently reviewing are books that have been in our library for some time. And so as our books have evolved, so have our rules that we apply according to how we read the books. And so ellipses is one of those things where we used to actually, announce ellipses, but now we would just pause. And so that's the current way that we handle that now. And so part of that is when you're looking at the QA's process, you might not want to be as worried about how we handle those minute details because they have changed over time, but it's really does the way it's announced now take away from what the user is experiencing. But thank you for asking that question, Terry. Okay.
Yeah, that explains it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Janet?
I have noticed quite a bit of noises that I would have hoped had been fixed before it got to the level that I'm listening to. The most prominent ones are sibilants, and I think I have seen that that's gotten better both in the listener quality control that I have been doing and then listening to this now. I found some background noises like air conditioners is the only thing I can think of. But one of the things that I find in every book I think I have worked on is there are sporadic electronic noises. And when I'm doing a listener Q&A, I consider it part of my job to make sure that there aren't any of those electronic noises. Sometimes I can get rid of them myself. Here, of course, all I can do is listen and note them. And the electronic noises that I'm hearing, I think are happening around some of the navigational aids. So I'm noting all of these things as I go. I also check that all the navigational aids work. So section titles, page numbers. So besides making sure when you click on the navigation aid, it goes to the right place, you need to make sure that the title in the navigation aid is the same that the reader is announcing. I think having listened to all of this, I'm really learning how critical it is for these extra noises. I think one of the things that in being a quality control on the listener side, I do have people who do a lot of sibilance is probably the big one. And I think we really have to push harder on that. I think with some people where I've listened to books that they've read a number of books, I'm no longer complaining about it because I'm just assuming, well, I guess this is how it goes. And I think we've got to be more vigilant on that. So the best thing to do is that the reader needs to listen to their own recordings, at least snippets, because for people who are having a lot of sibilance problems, it's constant.
So thank you, Janet, for sharing. And those are all really, really good points that you both bring up, because it really goes back to what is the user experience, but also what can we do as volunteers, as staff who are narrators, who are quality listeners. How can we change that from the beginning? And so how can we take some personal responsibility in the very beginning of the project to listen to our things and to help with that quality? So that actually ties into exactly what Eleanor and Michael will be talking about in terms of what can you do to prep your environment beforehand. Thank you. Maria?
Yep, so we're going to turn it over to Mike and Eleanor now. Thank you, Audrey.
Thanks, Audrey. So just to kind of go back to where Terry was speaking about the some of the issues she's hearing, and also what Janet was hearing, there is a lot to be said to the equipment that you're using, and what that equipment is really geared towards, and also what your signal to noise ratio is, in knowing what that really means, and that we want more of your physical voice than we need more of the the ambient background noise that's happening potentially in your environment. So it's a matter of going from something as simple as a USB microphone that's got the proper polar patterns that will help you alleviate potential sound issues that can creep up or pop into your recording, or you can go with something that's even more high end, where you have a XLR based microphone. Oops, going the wrong way. That would need some phantom power and also an interface in order to gain the proper signal to noise ratio. So, if you have questions about what you're using and what you might want to, look into, if you're, a volunteer that's running into what Janet is running into, where you're getting a lot of noise, we're happy to help and give you recommendations on that. So, reach out to us and let us know.
Great. And just a note on that pickup pattern that Michael mentioned. Cardioid is what we recommend for narration work. It's basically a heart shape from the front of the microphone. So that will minimize that background noise. So that is the best.
And that's a good point. And what you may be looking for, if you are looking to update your gear, look for a microphone that gives you those different patterns in order to, have that option.
Yep. One of the microphones that we recommend highly is the Blue Yeti. That's kind of a mid-grade consumer level microphone, and it actually has different patterns that you can choose on the microphone, and Cardioid is one of those.
Yeah, and really the microphone to the environment is the real trick. I'm using a microphone right now that I would not necessarily put into an environment that was not treated, because what it's doing is it's having a lot of fun picking up everything that's around me in the room that I'm in. So knowing that you have a microphone that could be doing that, you might want to think about some treatment if you already haven't. Carpets are great, drapes are wonderful. Anything over top of your desktop, you can lay something down over your desktop to absorb sound. Anything that can absorb sound, throw pillows. I mean, people go into a small closet that's filled with clothes to record. And that all stems and goes back to what Kevin ultimately has to handle in his final process of audio. So I think the real trick to all of this, and the real key to all of this, is making sure that your audio is as clean and as clear and as free of extraneous noises that will come to Kevin, as he stated, in a raw format, untreated. So that way we can assess what's going on. And then if there is a recipe needed, the recipe is applied. If the recipe is not needed, the file moves on through the chain. So it's up to you guys to let me know, or let us know if you have any questions or concerns about that. And I'm absolutely happy to get on a call, a Zoom call. I can look at what you're working with. I can show you what I'm working with, and then hopefully we can meet in the middle.
Yep. To Mike's point about kind of conditioning your space, we do highly recommend a walk-in closet if you have that available. It really is an ideal recording environment. I use it myself for our training narration. So if you have that available, that's great. But if you don't, you can think of creating that space as kind of feathering your nest. You want soft surfaces, irregular surfaces, and you can create those yourself by, using one of those accordion screens and then draping blankets over them. Moving blankets are great as well. So there are some DIY, do-it-yourself methods of creating that kind of space too. Our storyteller training has that, and our new textbook narrator training teaches you all about this stuff as well.
Yep.
Great.
So let us know if you have any questions.
Yep. Let's see. Somebody asked what sibilance sounds like. I actually have a sibilance problem myself. So if you want a great example, you can say, Sally sells seashells by the seashore.
Yeah,
That old tongue
sibilance
twister.
that's a little over the top, almost comes through as a whistle.
Mhm.
And then when there's a whistle on top of an S, it's distracting in theory. And that's what we want to try and work. The RX isotope software is able to pull that frequency right down and become less of, and I'm not being derogatory, Eleanor, but less of an irritant.
No, I understand.
When
Yeah.
it comes to when you're listening to something
Yeah.
and you're trying to absorb it and engage with it and enjoy it. And Eleanor's voice is absolutely pleasing, but she does give the example of that minor whistle on certain S's that are happening.
Yep, definitely. I'm aware of it. And you actually can do some things as you narrate to minimize it. Something about tongue position and trying to keep the tongue against the teeth for those S's as well. So
Yeah, and there's
some
also,
of that is in the training too.
Absolutely. And there's also ways, and to Eleanor's point, there's also ways to turn your microphone in a little bit off axis.
Yep.
That's more for plosive because that's taking some wind. When you're speaking, that wind is what's causing that thump. So, there are some things that we can do, but it is up to the narrator to really understand what those points of interest are, and what we're looking for, and what we're trying to make sure isn't coming through, because there's a lot of audio coming through, and the less processing we have to do the audio, the quicker it gets from point A to the child's ears.
We have a bunch of questions coming in for the Q&A all the way back to when Kevin was sharing. So Audrey, Kevin, do you want to jump in here and we will tackle some of your questions? And Mike and Eleanor will definitely need your help as well too.
No problem.
So I'm just going to go down the list. I'm looking at this first one, and I think we covered this a little bit, but Todd asked, is room tone important?
Well, I wouldn't mind taking that one. In room tone is important if you're, it's something that we would use in order to, fix some deep breathing or, maybe some pacing, but otherwise, I think that it's not needed as much as you would see it in the industry of like the publishing industry outside of Learning Ally. But if you have an issue with your tone and there's something going on, please do alert us so we can, again, going back to Kevin's description, make sure the recipe is pulling that tone down to a proper level that is matching, maybe a previous recording.
Yeah. In addition to creating or de-breathing some of those loud breathing noises, we also use it to sometimes pad out some of the images in our voice text product, because we want to leave at least 2 to 3 seconds for that student to absorb the image before the narration picks up again.
And that's a wonderful point, Eleanor. I forget that does happen, that we are adding that pause for the engagement. So room tone is valuable. So we're not just using something the same over and over and over again, or though we are using it over and over again, but it's not something that's pulled erroneously from the file. It's either at the head or the tail, and it's true room tone. There's nothing else going on. So very good point. Yep.
I think one of the most important things of that is that it needs to be consistent. Honestly, you need to make sure that your recording environment stays the same through the project as close as you can, because then the room tone will be consistent. We can target an offensive sound, or we can draw from a usable sound.
And while Russell pointed on to something that I forgot I was going to mention, that there is such a key component to all this, that a lot of our volunteers are not necessarily doing this work all the time. So what they do is they have their little setup and they set up their recording. They do their recording for Learning Ally, and guess what? They might break down the setup and go use their laptop and sit on the couch for a little while and do some emailing or whatever. So the takeaway from that is making sure that when you set your gear back up, it is set up the exact same way it was before. And it's always good to take a picture of how things are set up, or even put a piece of tape down on your tabletop where your microphone was set, how high it was set. You know, get all of those parameters so you can feel comfortable that, oh, yep, I'm going to take my laptop and I'm going to go walk away from here and go work on something else. And then that way, when you set it back up, you're not going to hear Kevin going, that last file that came through, there's something drastically wrong there. So he won't speak like that, but you know what I mean.
Thank you, Mike. We have another question here about, this one's for Kevin. So in addition to avoid pre-processing, are there particular kinds of problems where we should be aware that cause problems in post-production? So I think we kind of covered this in when Audrey and some of the volunteers shared, but Kevin, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
The biggest thing is when narrators start adding effects onto their audio, because what happens, or what can happen, is there's no, like, if you are normalizing your audio, there's no way for me to remove that after it's been done. So that's why we recommend the best, cleanest signal you can get for your recording is what we require, because what happens sometimes when these plugins get added is it muddies the audio and it introduces these artifacts where it just sort of kind of sounds washy. And at that point in time, there's no filtering that out. And if you can't go back to the original audio, you know, it's kind of almost a wasted effort. So like, that's just the best recommendation, you know, get the best possible signal from the source. That's the best advice I can give.
Yeah, and if I can add a little bit to that, to Kevin's point, you know, when you normalize something, you're normalizing everything that was there. So if all of a sudden you're normalizing something that had more noise to signal ratio, you've now created this file that has all of this noise, and your actual true signal of your narration is buried underneath of that noise. So you want the opposite. You want your signal to noise ratio higher than you want your signal higher than your noise ratio. So be careful what you're actually normalizing. And if you are seeing any sort of, you know, the other thing I would recommend, kind of going back a little bit, if you do have an editor and your editor allows you to look at your audio in a spectral view, that's very telling on what you may have as your noise floor. In a typical waveform display, you don't get that that frequency visualization. So if you can look at your audio, and this is to the editor or narrators, if you can look at your audio inside of a spectral view, that will give you a better representation of what your noise floor is and where your problems might lie. But again, normalizing something that's full of noise is just giving us a lot of noise, versus normalizing something that is a very clean signal and it's just brightening it up to its highest peaks that are possible from its highest value possible. That is okay.
If I can add to that a little bit, Michael. Also, when you're in the EasyBook software, it's going to be that nice gray line, that space in the middle. So if you can get your peaks to really remain within that space, that's the ideal zone that you want to go for. And so like they said, the more that you can minimize any extraneous sound and stay within that sweet spot, that's going to be what's ideal.
Yep, the bulk of the waveform should be in that central lighter gray area, but it is okay if it goes into that darker gray area, as long as you don't get that red clipping spike.
Yeah, and the visual on that is where your audio looks like it's been hedged. It's been cut with a hedge trimmer.
I had a question here for Audrey. So for new, and Kevin as well, for new QA volunteers, does someone else review the audiobooks for QA as well in case we miss something? So it goes through the software that Kevin showed us and then over to QA volunteers. Can either of you explain a little bit more about the QA process and how we're ensuring that even the QA volunteers are picking up the little things at the end?
I'll start off. For my titles, for the new voice text titles, I have multiple volunteers review each title, get a different set of ears on it. You're more likely to find more issues that may or may not have been, in there. And I do the final sign off on a pass fail. So it generally it's 4 or 5 separate people take a look at each title, and you get the best take on what the user experience is.
Yeah, and I would follow suit with what Kevin is saying. For the most part, what we try to do is the QA experience at the end should be really that final step of, okay, this is great audio and it's already in the library. What we try to do is before it even gets into the library, we've added some other filtering systems, especially on the textbook side, to make sure that by the time it gets to the library, everything is already caught. However, like I said, these are several titles that have already been in our library, and so we do have some additional quality checking as well, including me listening to. Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey and Kevin. So I'm seeing a lot of questions about specific microphones. We might just want to follow up with volunteers individually. And
Perhaps, but I'd like to sort of give a general comment on microphones and equipment. We have recommended equipment lists, but that's because that's gear that we have dealt with more personally, so we can offer you more support on that. If it's a different type of microphone that we haven't used, I mean, I know AT2020 is a good brand. It's a good, solid microphone. The Nessie Blue is a good, good brand, good microphone. We need you to be a little more proactive in setting some of that stuff up and testing it for us. As part of training for narration, you'll send us voice tests, which you can use to sort of, audition that equipment with us. But you're going to be building your own recording space, setting up your own home environment. If you can make it sound good, it's good. That's really what it comes down to. And that's going to be sort of a personal process, picking out the right microphone for the room that you have, for the equipment that you have, for the computer that you have. Our lessons will kind of walk you through the basics of that. There will be steps where you will, submit samples to us so that we can give you some feedback on it. But it is really gonna, you are gonna kind of need to be a bit of a self-starter with some of that work.
Yeah, and to just go a little bit further with that, from what Russell's point is, the one thing I also recommend to narrators that I work with is if there is any room in the budget is to order a few different models in order to get a good little, or not good little, but get an A, B, and a C of what your voice sounds like from different microphones. Because you could buy this microphone and it sounds okay, and then you wouldn't know that the AT2020 you sound much better and it's a less noise to signal ratio going on. It's not required, but if you do have the ability and you can, it's something that I do recommend, because one microphone you get a test through, yes, it sounds okay, but could it sound better? And we're not telling you to spend, exorbitant amounts of money, but especially if you buy things through Amazon, you can get 3 of them, you can get 2 of them, one goes back, no problem. But it's something that we've done before, and it's recommended.
Can I just jump in and try and touch on, I know we're running out of time. I just want to touch on a couple of questions here just about sort of the quality control process. As books are being recorded, we have another role for volunteers as proof listeners. Hopefully some of you know what that is already, where the work that's in progress is being evaluated as it's done. And that evaluation includes feedback to the narrator. So if the person who's listening to your stuff recognizes errors, and they should if they've completed my training, then they will be telling you, hey, this is what's wrong here. Please, correct this. Please re-record this passage due to sibilance. Please re-record this due to volume issues. They'll also point out when you mispronounce the main character's name or something like that. So there will be, a dialogue around that as you are working your way through. There is also a question here, is it not required for narrators to listen back to what they've recorded? Always. If you have set aside an hour to narrate, you have 45 minutes to narrate, and you have 15 minutes when you are going to evaluate the work that you've done in that 45 minutes. You need to make sure that's part of your work time, part of your volunteer time includes self-assessment, because you can say, hey, that's great, I got through a whole hour of narration. And then if you've missed a whole bunch of errors and that stuff comes back to you, well, not only is that a lot of extra work for you, but we're delaying the book being delivered by that. So, please make sure that you are taking that time to do your own QC sweep, so that'll reduce the amount of QC that needs to be done after you're done. Thanks.
I did get a question about how long it takes for the book to get to students. Audrey or Kevin, do you want to share what happens right after it goes through QA, and then how long it takes to get to the students?
So, barring any issues in the QA process, the titles are available the next day if everything passes. Obviously, if we need to do rereads or any kind of editing, that will delay the process for potentially a couple of days. But it's generally when there's no issues, it's a pretty fast turnaround time.
Yeah, and on the textbook side, it's slightly different because we build the project from beginning to end. So it starts in a flow where the talk toolers get the PDF, and from there they build the talk, which becomes our EasyBooks files. And then from there, it's passed on to folks who do the bookmarking, the guidelines, and then goes into active production. Active production can take anywhere from 1 month to 2 months, so anywhere from 30 days to 60 days, depending on the due date for that book. And then once that occurs and it is sent over to Kevin for processing, then that takes a couple days and then can go into the library. So the total process now can take about 2.5 months. Can take longer, but that's something that we're trying to make shorter turnaround time. Thank you.
So we are out of time. We're a few minutes over, but I just want to say we will get to your questions. We can follow up in an email and cover all the questions that we didn't get to during this session. There's also an opportunity to add more questions in the survey that we're going to send to you in an email and after you close out. But before you guys leave, I just want to really quick share with you a finished product. So this is a recording from, one second. This is a recording from Eileen Yen, a volunteer narrator. And the story is The Bug Girl. So this is the finished product that our students get to look at and listen to when it's in their library.
The first time I made friends with a bug, I was 2.5 years old. My mom took me to a butterfly conservatory, which is like a zoo for butterflies. As soon as we got there, a butterfly perched on my shoulder. It flitted onto my hand and my foot, my elbow and my head, even my nose. It stayed with me the whole time we were there. When it was time to go home, a guard stopped us at the door. "I'm sorry, miss. The butterfly has to stay here," he told me.
So I'll stop us right there. I just want to say thank you to Eileen for creating that awesome recording of the story, and all the other volunteers who worked on creating that book. So the listeners, QA volunteers, the post-production of the audiobook. Thank you for working hard and doing what you do to deliver these books to our students. And with that, I'm going to close us out. Like I said, you're going to receive a survey to fill out. You can ask questions about everything we covered and provide us feedback. Thank you to Mike, Kevin, Audrey, Russell, Eleanor, Terry, and Janet for being here today. This was a very large panel than what we're usually doing here. So thank you guys for everything you've shared. And have a great day, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.